Hi, this is John Rowell for the Rowell Report. Today is Friday, October 3rd, 2025, and I'd like to discuss in this video regarding the proposed no-fly zone over Ukraine, which has been proposed by Poland and discussed by different NATO leaders. This no-fly zone has a purpose, not only to take out the Russian drones and missiles which fly into Ukraine, but I'll discuss here the real purpose behind the no-fly zone. So anyway, as a backdrop, we were given information about Russia violating Polish airspace, and the Western news media said that it was either intentional or unintentional, and then they said that Russia admitted that it was unintentional, and so, but they're saying if Russia violated their airspace, they were testing the limits of NATO and the patience of President Donald Trump, and that this was, of course, intentional, not unintentional, but Russia never admitted to any incursions into NATO airspace. Asked for proof of incursions, they were never provided with any. So we continue to go on with suppositions regarding violations of airspace. What I had heard is that the drones which flew into Poland um, had Ukrainian SIM cards, so that may or may not be true, but the range of these drones is much less than the Polish border. So, how they crossed the Polish border into Poland is a mystery, but they could have arrived through several different ways. First, they could have been launched from within Ukraine, and apparently, all you need to do is pick them up off the fields, because these were the dummy drones, which are meant to absorb the air defense, and just refuel them and give them a navigational destination and launch them, and away they go. So that could have been one way. The other way would have been in the back of a pickup truck. So if we think that these drones were launched from inside Russia and then landed somewhere in Ukraine because they ran out of fuel, then they could just be picked up from a field in Ukraine, put in the back of a pickup, driven across the Ukraine-Poland border, and then these could have been deposited in different fields at some point, and then somebody could have given a heads up to authorities who said that they got a report of a drone sitting in a field, so they go out and they verify that, of course, Russia sent this drone to Poland intentionally to, create panic and to show NATO that Russia is testing the NATO's resolve and defensive lines. So all this ridiculous narration which was given to these drones. Then we had the supposed incursion of Russian MiGs into Estonian airspace. So that was another story that came out, and they presented at the UN. Estonia presented at the UN the flight pattern of the Russian planes. So they took two different points on either ends of Estonia's airspace, and they just drew a straight line between the two. Um, so basically, that was no proof at all. That was somebody's take home high school project, how to draw a line within the Estonian airspace to show that Russian planes, Russian MiG fighter jets violated Estonia airspace. So again, and then we got the news of mysterious drones being seen near the German border, more mysterious drones being flown in Denmark, and when they went to shoot down the drones, they couldn't find them, which means that possibly they um, were either not drones. They could have been balloons that were sent up with lights to light up to simulate drones, or they could have been and the other make believe, could have been AI added into a video. It could have. There's many ways that those drones could have been added. In any case, drones are very popular. Many people have them, and so people can fly drones all the time. If a young person gets a drone for a Christmas present, they may not know all the rules, so they may be flying them. But why were these drones flying with all these flashy lights? Hey, look at me! Hey, hey, hey! Here I am. So the Danish people are saying, the Danish leaders are saying that the drones were there to cause panic and to interrupt their flights. And so, the drumbeat of all these violations into airspace of NATO seemed to be painting a picture, and it seemed to be getting clearer. And of course, this was to support what we understand now as this no-fly zone over Ukraine. And the no-fly zone, they're basically trying to impose over Ukraine what was imposed over Iraq. And after the first Gulf War. So basically, this would be enforced by NATO planes if they wanted to impose a no-fly zone. So that would mean that NATO jets would fly into Ukraine, over Ukraine, to shoot down anything that flies into Ukraine from Russia. But anyway, here's an article from Aerotime, and the last part of the here we talk about NATO launches Eastern Sentry. This was, of course, one of the goals of this whole airspace drone violations, which supposedly occurred. So Germany sending planes, France is sending planes. Basically, they're getting NATO assets closer to Russia, closer to the conflict, and of course, there's the possibility of a false flag, of a false attack on NATO forces, which they could be done to try to bring the United States into the conflict and to enforce or announce a no-fly zone. Um, we have here about the UK deploying Typhoon fighters to Poland, and here's the key point of this article. Beyond the risk of escalation, enforcing a no-fly zone would also require neutralizing Russian air defenses in Russia and Belarus, constant patrols by fighters, tankers, and AWACS aircraft, and clear rules of engagement, all of which would stretch NATO resources and expose crews to high risk. Well, this wouldn't expose crews to high risk. This would expose all of Europe to high risk. If you think that NATO planes, by attempting to take out air defenses in Russia and Belarus, wouldn't start a war between Russia and NATO, so you can see kind of this mission creep, which is a constant of US NATO involvement, where they start with a small group and they get them closer and closer to the conflict, and eventually, somehow magically, they're attacked, and so they need to reply. And then we get some big announcement from the White House that we're not going to sit back and let ourselves be attacked by these evil Russian people. So sounds very similar to the beginning of the Vietnam War, when a U.S. Ship was attacked by a CIA patrol boat, and it was devised to make it look like an attack by a North Korean boat. I mean, a North Vietnamese boat on a U.S. ship. and that basically got the U.S. public on the side of greater U.S. involvement in Vietnam. This is, this is old school stuff. We've seen it before. This is a movie this is, version 5, version 6, version 8, version 20 of the same movie. So we know what the conclusion is. Of course, is direct involvement of NATO. Why would they want to have a no-fly zone? Why would they want to take out um, Russia and Belarus air defenses and their air force so that they can introduce troops into Ukraine? But NATO doesn't have the NATO doesn't have the troops available to introduce into Ukraine. So why set up a no-fly zone and try to protect the the airspace of Ukraine if you don't have troops to introduce? Well, then this would be so. The conclusion of all this no-fly zone would be so that NATO jets could attack Russian troops on the ground. And of course, as I mentioned, the moment that NATO attacks Russia, jets, fighter jets or air defenses, this blows up into a full blown Russia NATO war. And I don't know how NATO will come out of that, but certainly Russia will start to put away the little firecrackers and bring out the big firecrackers, the Oreshnik and the next generation missiles, and we'll see how many European capitals will be hit. And what the result of that is. Europe doesn't have the air defense systems in place. They've given them all to Ukraine and to Israel, so they're left basically undefended. And so the ballistic missiles and the missiles like the Oreshnik would come in basically unimpeded and hit whatever target they were flying towards. So anyway, and then we have the reaction here of Medvedev from Russia. Medvedev says no-fly zone over Ukraine will mean NATO-Russia war. Well, that's obvious, because how would they set up a no-fly zone if they weren't going to attack the Russia fighter jets and Russia and Belarus air defense systems? So basically, this would put Russia and NATO in a direct head-to-head conflict. So this is the crazy idea of Poland, but also other NATO countries are talking about it. They've been talking about that in the U.S. Congress. They're continuing to look for support. So basically, what they need is to create the backing of the U.S. public for such a measure. And as I mentioned in the example for the start of the Vietnam War, the U.S. ship was fired on by the CIA boat that was pretending to be a North Vietnamese Viet Cong boat attacking them, and that got the U.S. public behind the invasion of Vietnam and the continuing um, mission creep that took place right up until the end of the war. So you can see this is all elements that are being used. So here is the comment of Medvedev. He says, but seriously, the implementation of the provocative idea of creating a no-fly zone over Ukraine and the ability for NATO countries to shoot down our UAVs will mean only one thing: a war between NATO and Russia. So basically, this is what NATO is pushing for, not so that NATO will be in a war with Russia, but so that the US will come to the rescue of these NATO nations, which are basically militarily useless, and try to come to their rescue. Um, I think the example of that could be seen in Napoleon. I believe Napoleon had his brother, was it his brother, who was in charge in Spain, and he was, he didn't have any of the ability of Napoleon Bonaparte to, you know, uh, for maintaining a political or military control over Spain. So there was a continual um, attacks and upheaval in Spain. So Napoleon would have to ride in, take care of the problem, and then ride back out. And the invasion of Russia took place only after um, Napoleon could ensure peace and tranquility in Spain. So, um, Napoleon is kind of like the U.S. in a way, and surrounded by mediocre warmongers who just look for trouble, for problems, but then don't know how to solve it. So we have Sikorski in Poland, whose wife is Anne Applebaum, a real um, neocon globalist, and he goes along with the same storyline. He keeps on putting out these warmongering um, solutions to the problem in Ukraine and how to resolve the conflict. Anyway, the main point is no fly zone will not work over Ukraine, and if they try to implement it, it will mean sure war, and this will mushroom, and it's hard to say how big this conflict could get. So, anyway, that's my report for today about the no fly zone. I don't think it's going to fly. Tell me if you think differently. Put in the comments below. If you like this video, please hit the like button and subscribe. Thank you for supporting independent journalism, and I wish you a very good day. Bye bye.